On the new series entitled Rules and Regulations of Tennis, I'm about to go into depth into different problems that we encounter when we're playing league or recreational matches. On today's episode, we'll be tackling the hard questions of whether or not you can reach over the net to hit the ball before it crosses the net. Or how about if the ball already crossed the net, landed on your side, and spun back to the other side of the net? Can you reach over and hit the ball? These are just the few of the questions that we're going to be tackling today. I hope you enjoy it. Okay. There you go. Sounds good. So the reason I'm doing this is since this podcast is focused on recreational players, when you play a lot of recreational tennis, whether it be with your friends or in league, especially in league when there's more on the line and you're more competitive, a lot of times people question each other, whether the ball was in or out, or they don't know the rule when a ball comes on the court and one person sees it and the other person doesn't. How many times can you toss the ball and catch it before it's a problem? Right? So there's a bunch of issues I see, and to tell you the truth, I don't always know the answer either. And unless you look into the rules yourself, I'll be honest with you, you can't trust what you find on YouTube. You might not even be able to trust what you see an official do in a pro tournament. Obviously, they're supposed to know the rules. That's why they're there. They're supposed to be the unbiased judge, the interpreter of the rules, like a real judge, right? That's their job. Their job isn't to be biased, to favor the other person. Their job is to speak up when there's a question that occurs. And in tennis, obviously, it's a little different than in court. The judge is supposed to sit there unless there's an obvious, problem. But usually the judge is there in court to sort of decide the issues when both sides or parties are having a problem. When there's an objection, the judge needs to step in and rule. When there's a question as far as, if a document needs to be admitted, things like that. In tennis, though, we rely on the judges a lot more when they're there. And they're sort of talking every point, calling out the score, things like that. But, I just thought this series is going to be so interesting because as I, figure out which rules I want to go over and attack, I'm going to try to put at least a decent amount of research into it to see if I can find the rules on point and then come to a conclusion in this video on what the answer to the question is. So for this particular one, it's this series of going over the rules with you for the recreational player. I really wanted to touch on when you reach over the net and hit a ball. And the reason it's in the forefront of my mind is that I played some doubles yesterday with some guys out of San Diego. Good group of guys. I think the other three guys were all 5-0. But it was just a good, fun doubles match, not league, anything like that. And what I've been trying to do in doubles is I've been trying to, when we call poach, we're really trying to step diagonally, forward and sideways towards the middle of the court when I'm at the net and close, right? And if we call poach and I'm doing it right, I'm really stepping forward close to the net. And if I hit it and it's in, and the other side hits it back, I should be very close to the net, right? My partner's hopefully backing me up behind me. So what happened yesterday was there was this shot where I poached. I stepped diagonally, more sideways and forward, took a forehand volley out of the air, punched it sort of down the middle, and the guy that was returning back there stepped over and hit it back to me. And before I knew it, I was really almost on top of the net, almost touching it. And I'm going to talk about that too, touching the net, little hiccups to the main question of can you reach over the net. But I found myself being able to, or have the ability in that moment to actually reach over the net and put it away. Like the angle would have been so ridiculous, I could have hit it directly sideways, right? That's how on top of the net I was. And so I sort of let it go. And then the ball passed me and it was a winner. And in that moment, I didn't really know what to do. And we all sort of laughed. And I was like, I let it go because it was coming at me so close. And I was so close to the net, I didn't know what to do. And if I studied these rules, I would have known what to do in that moment. Okay, I would have known, well, I don't want to get to give you the answer just yet. But the question became, can I reach over the net? Obviously without touching the net. I think everyone sort of knows, and I guess I'll touch on it, but everyone sort of knows you can't touch the net, right? You fall into the net, you're losing the point. But everyone sort of knows what happens if you touch the net. But the real question is, can you reach over and sort of get that ball before it crosses the net and hit it? Similar question, okay, and right, not directly exactly the same. If that ball's high, lands on your side, spins back, okay, now it landed on your side, it spun back either because of spin or the wind. Can you reach over the net and hit it? Okay, so there's sort of two different questions there. Okay, can I reach over the net before it gets to me and hit it? Can I reach over the net if the ball's landed on my side and either spins back or is pushed by the wind? Can I hit it? Okay. So those are two different questions. And then also I'm going to be touching on this rule that's, or the question of whether or not when that ball bounces on my side and it spins back, if I can reach over the net and hit it, really what I'm going to be tackling is what can I do with that ball? Can I hit it back in the net, which is impossible for them to retrieve it? Or, so versus can I just hit it and then they have the off chance of getting it? So it's sort of a separate question of what do you do after kind of thing. But I want to first tackle, can we even do these things? And because it's the first episode, I want to go over a few sort of background things. And it's going to be important, I think, to listen to this part, because if I just went straight into the rule, I think you would be missing a lot of what goes into coming to the conclusion. And I don't bring it up in any of my podcasts. Sometimes my guests bring it up, but I happen to be a lawyer. And that doesn't dare mean that I'm smarter than you or anything like that. In fact, the joke I always make when someone goes, "Oh, you're a lawyer," I go, "Yeah, I'm not smarter than you. It just means I'm in more debt than you and I have more school loans than you. That's all it means. I went to school longer and I have more school loans than you." Okay, doesn't mean anything. I'm not smarter, but I do have more experience in looking at rules, interpreting a rule, and trying to figure out why did they write this rule? Who are they going after with this rule? How do you defend against a rule? Because I'm a defense attorney, not a criminal defense attorney, but I defend people's licenses. And so I'm constantly looking at a rule and trying to figure out a way to help my client and defend them, and maybe even ultimately say, "Ooh, this rule my client allegedly violated, but there's 3 parts to this rule. They only violated 2 of the 3 parts. So technically, if all 3 parts have to be there in order for this person to have violated the rule, my client only did 2 of the parts, not the 3. My person's innocent or not culpable or whatever the court we're in." And so that little background too is important. You have to, when you're looking at a rule, you can't just read it and it's like, I now get it. You sort of have to look at it and dissect it and try to figure out what's the intent of it. A lot of times, really good lawyers who defend criminal attorneys, they'll go into the intent of a rule or the intent of, some sort of code, right? If there's like, I don't know, I don't want to get that much into it, but, I just thought it was important to go over some background stuff before we go into that rule. And another thing just to know is, before this morning, I didn't even know where to find these rules. I assumed the USTA would have these rules, right? So I just started Googling tennis rules or, all these things, and different things came up. But I was happy to see that the USTA did have something formal on their website, and it was connected to the International Tennis Federation, which is a different body. I think if I'm wrong on this stuff, I apologize, but I tried to do my due diligence, right, as an attorney. Hold on, isn't there a microphone here? Due diligence. And and really try to find out what I'm talking about. But according to my basic research, the International Tennis Federation is different from the ATP and the WTA, but they all work in conjunction together and obviously have different authority over different tournaments. But it's the ITF and through the USTA that really makes these rules and provides a handbook to the officials that are out there officiating. Okay. So I just started looking up, and the ITF also was something that was sort of, of like, hey, what is this to me? And so I started looking it up, and I'll give you another 30 seconds. Might be a boring part. If you want to skip it, that's fine. But I just found it interesting. The moment I looked up ITF, I found out that this person who sort of helped start it was this guy named Charles Duane Williams. That's all I wanted to look at. Oh, who was it? But then I noticed he died on April 15th, 1912. I don't know many dates, but I know that date is when the Titanic sunk, right? And because that submarine is in the news nowadays, I just had to read on because it's like, what, Titanic? And then I found that this poor soul actually perished on the Titanic. Charles Duane Williams was a passenger on the Titanic, died because it sunk on April 15th, 1912. So I sort of thought that was the end of the story, right? And as I started reading more, I found out that he had a son, R. Norris Williams. He was also on the Titanic. Then I just assumed, well, he must be dead also, or must have died on April 15, 1912. But when I clicked on his name, his date was that he didn't die until 1968. So then again, before I get into the rules, I just thought it was real interesting. I'm like, this, what? So he lived? Real interesting was that R. Norris Williams, the son of Charles Duane Williams, actually lived. His dad died during the sinking of the Titanic. His son, R. Norris Williams, actually saw his dad, and I'm not trying to get graphic here. It's sort of a very interesting and sad story, but the son saw his dad actually die from one of those huge, I don't want to call them smokestacks. I think I wrote it here. Oh, they called it a funnel. One of those huge funnels of the Titanic falling. Remember, if you saw the movie, it fell and it sort of landed on people. R. Norris Williams actually tells a story later on when he's interviewed that he saw his dad pass away this way. So pretty sad. But you can see that there was parts in that movie that obviously came from first-hand tellings of the story of what happened that day. And I also thought it was sort of hilarious that R. Norris Williams talks about the fact that he actually broke down this door to help someone. And one of the workers there actually threatened to fine him. And so again, that was another thing in the movie. If you saw Leo, actually, like, I forget what he did. If he broke down a door with an axe, I'm trying to think back in the movie. But some worker was like, hey, you can't do that. That's whatever the name of the company was. Sorry, I had to cough. But they threatened him with a fine or said, you're going to have to pay for that or something like that, right? And so it was just sort of hilarious in the movie, but I guess it came from real stuff. Anyways, that's all I want to go down there. Oh, I have to wrap this up with a bow. R. Norris Williams goes on later to win the U.S. Open not once, but twice. Okay, that's why I was bringing that up. It was just so crazy to me how this all sort of related back to this ITF when I was just looking up what is the ITF. Okay, let's get back to this stuff. I apologize for that little rant. So going back to what I said at the beginning, when you're dissecting a rule, you can't usually just read one rule and assume that you're going to come to the right conclusion. It doesn't usually work that way. And not only doesn't usually work that way, like I said before, you also have to assume that there's sort of parts in the rule, right? There's sort of, in the criminal world, they call it elements. The big elements are like your intent, things like that, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the elements of a specific penal code violation. So for instance, I just, was Googling some penal codes, and this is important for us to understand later on too. But that's why I sort of want to explain it this way. I'm going to give you an example of a penal code violation and then just a quick explanation of why it's important to sort of break down the definition and sort of take it in parts and look at each word. So if we look at Penal Code 215 in California Penal Code 215, it's the carjacking penal code. So I just picked this one. I have no idea why, but when I looked at it, it says it's the taking of a motor vehicle in the possession of another from his or her person or immediate presence, or from a person or immediate presence of a passenger against their will, right? And there's some other language. So if you look at this, well, I mean, you have a basic understanding of what Penal Code 215 is just by me reading it. Taking of a motor vehicle from someone. Yeah, we get it. That's carjacking. But then I started thinking like, wait, if you're going to defend someone and they've been charged with stealing of someone's, vehicle or whatever, like then I started thinking, well, what if the person you stole from was riding a bicycle, right? So I had a gun, pointed at them. I said, give me your bicycle. I took it, drove away, and I was charged with the Penal Code 215. Guess what? That charge shouldn't go forward, right? Because the definition in carjacking is taking of a motor vehicle. So if it's not a motor vehicle, the penal code itself doesn't apply. Whether you call that a defense to the rule or whether you want to call it innocent of carjacking, whatever you want to say, you start dissecting the rule to see if you can defend and help your client. Okay, so there's this other part where a prosecutor might be interested in the same rule because it said taking of a motor vehicle in the possession of another or from his or her person or immediate presence. This immediate presence thing is confusing, right? But then you start thinking as a prosecutor, like what if I'm walking up to your car with a gun. I'm just making this up totally. I don't know if it's 100% right, but it sounds right. I'm walking up to your car with my gun and you run away. You the driver, you see it, you get scared, you jump out the other door and you run away. And then the person who was walking up to the car with a gun is charged with carjacking. The defense attorney goes, what are you talking about? Why are you charging my guy with carjacking when the person's not even there? Like, why don't you just charge him with a theft of a vehicle, right? Because again, I'm not a criminal attorney, but I'm assuming carjacking guilty verdicts are probably worse than theft of car verdicts. Because when you look at this carjacking definition, there's a person involved. And those crimes that involve a person are usually a lot worse. So I'm going off on a crazy tangent, but the point I'm trying to make is because this is the first episode I'm doing this, I have to, I think, explain that when you look at a rule, you can't just look at the rule itself, because I'm not saying you will come to the wrong conclusion, but you might. You can't fully understand or teach on the conclusion of a question without looking at many of the rules that may apply. And a lot of times they're sort of competing rules, and you have to decide which one might out the other, right? That's another tough thing in the law. There's sort of two rules that may apply, and they're sort of competing with each other, competing rules. And then like this one here with this carjacking thing, you want to be able to look at a definition or a rule and then sort of cut it up and dissect it and see like, what do they mean by this? What are they talking about this? Well, this part of the definition sort of means I should come to this conclusion, but ooh, look at this end of the sentence. It's sort of screwing me up. Okay, so that kind of stuff's important. All right. Okay. Now that I gave you my little law professor spiel, let's go into it. Remember, I'm trying to figure out if I'm allowed to reach over the net during my tennis match. And it sort of splits into a few different scenarios where can I reach over the net when they're hitting it at me? Can I reach over the net when it's bounced on my side and it goes back? Then what do I do with that ball after? Can I hit it in the net? Can I hit it away? What if I touch the net? All these little things come up later. So I started looking at the rules. Okay, remember I found this on the USTA website. Let me go back to the name of it because that was important too. It was called Friends at Court. Okay, I looked up the 2023 version, and it's titled Handbook of Rules and Regulations. So you can look this up too. And if you come to a different conclusion than me, hey, that's the way the world works, right? There's one lawyer on one side, one lawyer on the other side. Trust me when I tell you they're coming out to two different conclusions. And who's the person who will decide it? The judge, right? Just like on court, it's the referee. Unfortunately, when there is no referee, you have to figure this stuff out on your own, okay? Okay, so let's go back to some of the rules that may apply. When I started searching this, I started finding other rules that are sort of going to help us ultimately interpret and decide what to do. And it's not necessarily going to answer the question right away, but it's going to help us when we finally come to that rule that's like, oh, this must be the rule. So I found a rule about making calls. The title of the section was called Making Calls. And under paragraph 5, it's 5 period, I just call it paragraph 5, it said that players make calls on their own side of the net. A player calls all shots landing on or aimed at the player's side of the net. Why am I bringing this up? Because ultimately we want the question to be answered of whether you can do something or not. But we're also trying to answer who's ultimately going to be able to call that during the match if there's no referee, right? If there's a referee, all this stuff becomes pretty simple unless they get the answer wrong and you get to complain back and say, Anthony said in his podcast, rule X, Y, and Z says this, then you can fight back. But when there's no referee, I thought these types of rules are important to talk about a little because it helps us understand, like in the heat of the moment, who's going to say what, who's ultimately going to win. And so this is interesting. Paragraph 5, a player makes calls on their own side of the net. A player calls all shots landing on or aimed at the player's side of the net. That helps me understand that when in doubt, there's probably this ultimate answer of me, the person who hit it, is going to be the person who ultimately decides on whether or not I reached over the net or not. That's what it sounds like so far. Obviously, our conclusion can change the more we read, but that's the start of it, okay? So let's keep that in mind. Let's talk about another one, paragraph 6 of that same, under that same section of making calls. It says opponents get benefit of the doubt. That's what it says right out of the rules. A player should always give the opponent the benefit of the doubt. When a match is played without officials, the players are responsible for making decisions. Okay, that's another one that sort of sheds a little light on stuff. We get it now. So the player that should make their own calls on each side of the net. Like I can't make you make a call. You can't make me make a call. When in doubt, right? When there's a match without officials, the players are responsible for making their own decisions. Okay, this is all little background stuff just to sort of help put things in perspective already. Okay. All right, so let's keep going here. Under that sort of same heading, there's a section called Requesting Opponent Help. It says under sportsmanship policy, now this is another question I really have to look into that I don't know the answer right now. There was rules and then there was sportsmanship policy, which in my opinion are not rules. Okay, so that's a little interesting too. So under the sportsmanship policy, under the heading of making calls, it says requesting opponent's help. When an opponent's opinion is requested and the opponent gives a positive opinion, it must be accepted. Okay. So that's another little thing here, a little nuance of, okay, so now we know who's making the calls, who's supposed to make the calls. When there's a doubt, you got to give it to the other side. But if I'm requesting your help, hey, did you reach over the net right now, buddy? I think you reached over the net right now. We already know the person who allegedly reached over the net, it's their call. The ball was aimed at their side, according to what I just read. And now me, as the person who hit the ball, and I think you hit it over the net, I go, didn't you just hit over the net? Right? I'm requesting the opponent's help. And when the opponent's opinion is requested and the opponent gives a positive opinion, it must be accepted. So in my example, if he says, no, I did not reach over the net, Unfortunately, it sounds like I have to accept it. Okay. We're just still going on here, right? This is interesting stuff. Let's see here. This is a little side note too that I wanted to bring up because I can see this happening where there's a little crowd, even if you're not a pro. Not necessarily in league matches, or actually maybe in league matches where you have friends watching or the other team watching. A lot of times, like if one doubles teams finish early, you're watching on the side, right? You're watching your buddies play. There's another rule called spectators never make calls. Okay. That was interesting. I'm like, ooh, I got to read this thing. Because even if you're a tournament where there's some people watching and they're right on the side and, in some chairs or whatever, like I have seen times where someone will scream from the sideline and go, that ball was in. It might be a friend of your opponent, right? Or, you never know. But I just was interested and I couldn't skip this part because it sort of still applies to our thing. Like, what if you do reach over the net and someone standing right directly to the side goes, he reached over the net or whatever, right? There's a section called spectators never make calls. And so funny, and the answer is it says a player cannot enlist the aid of a spectator in making the call. Spectators never make calls. No spectator has a part in a match. 3 distinct sentences that pretty much tell you spectators have no right to give their input. You as the player can't ask for their input. And ultimately, no spectator has a part in the match at all, which means they're not there in a sense when deciding the calls here. They have no input. I don't care what they say, according to the rules. I can't even ask them for help, right? It might help me get pissed at my opponent a little better. Like, hey, buddy, was that ball in that he called out? Yeah, it was way in. Ooh, okay. It's going to make me maybe go get the ref. Or maybe next time I'm going to watch this guy's calls a little closer, right? But ultimately, they have no ultimate answer or way of helping out in finding out the answer of whether I reached over the net. They can't go, I saw the guy reach over the net. Okay. Funny little story about that is a few years back, I was playing with a doubles partner where the ball, I think I was at the net. The ball went sort of deep into the side, and my doubles partner called the ball out right when it landed. He was standing there where the ball was landing. And when I looked at it, I had this second look, sort of like, sort of, what, huh? And to me, it looked sort of partly in, but I was I was way at the opposite side of our side of the court at the net, and he was way back there. I trust my partner. I'm going to trust my partner's call. It wasn't that I questioned whether it was in or out, but I sort of just gave a little double take, and it's like, oh, I couldn't tell, right? If it was in singles, I obviously could not have called it out. If it was in singles, I'm giving my opponent that point because I can't tell if it's in or out. Therefore, when in doubt, like we learned, it's the opponent's point. But that's not what happened. My partner, who I trusted, who was my friend, said it was out. The opponents got very upset and called us both cheaters, called that guy a cheater, and then looked at me, and I forget why they sort of considered me like the person who can make the ultimate decision. And I guess, the rules probably say either partner can. I'll look into that for another podcast. But they looked at me and said, how are you going to let your partner cheat like that? And I said, I trust my partner. My partner called it out. He says it's out. I couldn't see it. It looked pretty close to me because that was the truth. If I would have saw it in for a fact, I'm overruling my partner. That's just how it goes. And my partner can do that with me. But long story short, they said, how can you do this? And one of the guy's girlfriends, one of my opponent's girlfriends stood up and said, I have it on camera. And my opponent was like, let's see it. I go, we're not seeing that camera. Right. And they were like, if it's out, why don't you want to see it? And I didn't know this rule at the time. The spectator can never make calls, all this stuff, right? There's no input. They're not part of the match. You can't enlist the aid of a spectator, all this stuff. But I just knew in that moment it felt wrong. Like, I don't want someone bringing out a camera and then we'll have a different interpretations of what the camera shows us and, all this stuff, right? And so from a perspective of a lawyer, like I was like, look, I don't care what that thing shows us. I just don't want it in evidence. That's sort of how I felt, right? And I was like, I don't want to see it. It's not fair to be seen. Like, I don't know what, where you zoomed, and I don't want to get into it. My partner's call, we're done, right? So, and we sort of left it that way. They didn't like us after that, but that's how it was. I felt very normal about my call. I'm very truthful about stuff, and I felt good. But that was a little extra story here on the Spectators Never Met calls. Yeah, we're about 30 minutes into this, and I haven't even got to the question yet. I apologize. But like I said, this is episode 1. I'm not going to do this all the time and give you that background, okay? All right, let's get into it now. Now we're here. Remember what I said, not member. My dad makes fun of me when I say that. Remember what I said earlier about there's sometimes competing rules. So here's some different rules that may apply or might be competing with each other. And let's figure out sort of the answers to all our questions. So there is a section called touches, comma, hitting ball before it crosses net, comma, invasion of opponent's court. Ooh, that's interesting. Invasion of opponent's court. Wow. Double hits and double bounces. I didn't look into double bounces, double hits, which double hits is a big issue too. It's happened to me before too. So I do want to maybe dedicate a podcast to double hits. But right now we're focusing on only part of that, which was hitting ball before it crosses net. Awesome, right? So now I know this section is going to be right on point. Okay, I have all this other stuff in my mind, the background of, who's right, who's wrong, who should I trust, all this stuff. And now I come to the section of hitting ball before it crosses the net. And then it says, a player must concede the point when. And then they give us some bullet points on examples. So now the section is, again, touches, hitting ball before it crosses the net, et cetera, et cetera. And then it says a player must concede the point when. Okay. Let's look at the bullet points. A player must concede the point when a ball in play touches that player. Okay, that's good to know, but it doesn't apply to our situation. A player must concede the point when that player or the player's racket touches the net or opponent's court while a ball is in play. Okay? Sort of helps us answer some little, nuance of the question, right? Like, what if I did when I was reaching over and I touched the net or I hit the net or anything like that? Well, it's pretty easy to see here that a player must concede, right? Lose the point when that player or that player's racket touches the net or opponent's court. Okay. It's not answering our question yet, but sort of helped us, with some other stuff. Okay. Now, bullet point number 3 says a player must concede the point when that player hits a ball before it crosses the net. Okay. I think we got a good answer here. I think we did our due diligence in sort of looking at the other parts of the rule of the friend in court and the other rules and regulations prior to this to see if anything else popped up. This is sort of the first instance that I found where I think we found a rule that really applies to our question. It hasn't solved the problem of can I hit it backwards into the net? What if it bounces on our side? We can't be satisfied with just reading this rule and be done with it, right? Because it really hasn't answered all questions, but I feel it did pretty much lock up the answer to the question of whether or not we can reach over the net before the ball gets over the net. And remember my example earlier from my match yesterday, where I poached, hit a first volley, and then I was actually on top of the net, and the person hit sort of a slow ball, and I was about to reach over the net and sort of pulled back because something in me just told me, I felt weird, I didn't want to hit it, and it fell, and they won the point. And I left thinking, was I allowed to reach over the net and hit it? I don't know. None of us knew. All 4 of us some were in their mid-30s, me and my partner were in our 40s. None of us knew the answer to this question. We've been playing tennis our whole life. Here's the answer to the question. A player must concede the point when that player hits a ball before it crosses the net. Okay. Player. Let's cut this definition in parts, the important parts. Player, me, hits the ball, right? Obviously. Before. That's a big word. Before it crosses the net. Okay. Now I think we have the answer to the question. Could I have reached over the net and hit the ball and put it away for a winner? Ultimately, I'm trying to find out who wins that point, right? Let's pretend I would hit a winner. The answer to me is pretty simple. The player must concede the point. I lose the point when I hit a ball before it crosses the net. So now we still don't know what happens after it crosses the net. In fact, a little other side question is, can we hit the ball after it crosses the net, but then follow through over the net? I think there's some rules that apply to that too, but I hope I researched it. I don't really remember answering that question. But there's a video I want to talk about at the end too that might answer that question too for us. But I hate saying things 30 times, but sometimes when you're learning something, it's good to say them over and over again, especially when you're teaching something. It's good to break it down multiple ways and sort of try to dumb it down, not because they're dumb, but because, you're all learning it together. And the slower you say things and the more you repeat things and the more you say things slightly differently, the person you're trying to teach hopefully understands it better. And so again, I must concede the point when I hit a ball before it crosses the net. Okay? All right, makes total sense to me, right? All right, let's go to something else. Hopefully we'll answer some additional questions for us. Might be a little competing with the other rule, maybe not. Under number 24 of the rules of tennis, that's the heading, the rules of tennis, this one says player loses the point when, right? Here's the example. I forget how they classified it, but it says the player returns the ball in play so that before it bounces, it hits a permanent fixture. Well, that's interesting, right? Because that rule I wrote down for a very specific reason, and I was thinking about when that ball bounces on our side, spins back, and I'm able to sort of smack it backwards into the net. I sort of wondered if this rule applied. The player returns the ball so that before it bounces, it hits a permanent fixture. Player loses the point. I honestly did not devote enough time to truly understand this rule because there is literally videos on YouTube that I found this morning where people were trying to answer the question of, if the ball bounces on your side, comes back, can you hit it in the net? And it seemed very apparent to me that they were all right because they were like, of course you can do this. There's this caveat in the rules that allow you to reach over the net. I haven't got there yet, sorry. But there's this allowance of you being able to hit in the net. And this rule right here, I think, touches on it. The player returns the ball. Before it bounces, it hits a permanent fixture. I don't know what that means. I really do think this rule needs to be clarified. And this is one of those things that happen too, especially in the law, where when a rule is confusing or maybe applied wrong by judges or applied differently, when two smart judges can see things differently, yeah, that's called interpretation of the law, and two normal minds can think differently. But sometimes the rule is so confusing that it needs to be changed and clarified. And this is one of those. I don't know what this means. The player returns the ball in play so that before it bounces on my side or before it bounces on your side, before it bounces, it hits a permanent fixture. So I can imagine a ball coming on my side, coming back over the net and me hitting it into the net. The net is a permanent fixture. And this is all under the heading of player loses a point. So am I losing the point if I hit a permanent fixture before I let the ball bounce? I might be reading into this. You might be listening to this or looking at me on YouTube and going, this idiot claims to be a lawyer and he doesn't understand this basic rule. And honestly, sometimes I think that is an issue. That sometimes when you try to dissect it too much, you might screw yourself up. And sometimes things are so simple, and I'm trying to make them difficult, and I don't mean to. Long story short, I don't know if I'll ever answer the question here today of whether or not you could, when the ball bounces on your side, then bounces back over, can you hit it into the net? It sounds like you can, but this one little rule here makes me sort of question it, because it's saying the player returns the ball in play so that before it bounces, it hits a permanent fixture. Player loses the point. That's me. And I'm reminded of like those poles that sometimes stick out the side of the net where, they have the scorecards. If the scorecards aren't there, I don't even know if a scorecard's considered a permanent fixture. That's another great question, right? These rules really, you got to really look into them. Those scorecards can be taken off, but the pole I was thinking about that's stuck there. What if the ball lands on my side of the net, goes back, and I hit it, and I hit the pole? Is that my point? See, so do you understand what I'm saying? Why this rule, even though it sounds simple, like of course you can hit it in the net, you moron. I don't know if you can. Okay, but anyways, I wasn't trying to fully answer that question. I was trying to answer the question of, can I hit the ball before it crosses the net? We read that rule 5 minutes ago. You can't. Okay. Now, can I hit the ball when it lands on my side, goes backwards with spin or by wind? Now, what can I do? All right. Let's look. Under this same rule, 24, it says player loses a point when the player hits the ball before it passed the net. Okay. Well, we already answered that question, but you see how sometimes there's different parts in the same code and the same set of rules where you can find different, sort of similar and sometimes different answers to the same question. Okay. I think we're very well settled on whether you can or cannot reach over the net to hit a ball before it comes on your side of the net, before it crosses the net. That's the way the rules stated it exactly. You can't do it. But now, under Rule 25, we've been looking at so far where players lose the point, players concede the point. This section is entitled Good Return. Yeah, I don't know, a little confusing already, right? Good return. This sounds more in the positive. The last two sections were conceding, we're losing. This says good return. Sounds to me like it's where you're winning the point. Under Rule 25, entitled Good Return, under Section B, it says, after the ball is in play, has hit the ground within the correct court, and has spun or been blown back over the net, comma, the player reaches over the net and plays the ball into the correct court. Okay. That's Rule 25 under the heading of good return. To me, that means that it's your point. If after the ball in play has hit your side, okay, it's within the correct court. That's what the rules say, within the correct court. And that ball has spun or been blown back over the net, I am allowed to reach over the net and play the ball as long as I hit it into the correct court. See, this rule, to bring up what I was screwing up a few minutes ago, this rule makes me again call into question whether or not I can hit it backwards into the net, because it says I have to hit it into the correct court. Is the correct court the net? I don't know. Okay, I'm sorry to keep bringing this up, but my brain's taking it there. However, I will state that it looks like 100%, according to this Rule 25 under the section of good returns, heading B, that we 100% can reach over the net and hit a winner and hit the ball as long as it landed on our side first and spun back or was pushed back with wind. And as long as we reach over the net and we don't touch the net with our racket or our person, we can win that point. That's a good return according to the rules, okay? So it doesn't ultimately answer whether you can win the point. What if they get your return back, et cetera, but This is the answer that we were looking for. And let's keep it very simple before we go into the nuance again. I can't reach over the net if the ball itself hasn't crossed the net first. I can't reach over the net. Okay? I lose the point. I concede the point. I can reach over the net if the ball has passed or crossed the net first and has bounced in my court and has went backwards either through spin or through wind. I now can reach over the net as long as I don't touch the net with my person or my racket, and I can hit it, and that's considered a good return. Okay? We answered it. We answered it both. And so if you're going to look into this a little more, you got to look into hindrances and all this other stuff and then these other competing rules of whether or not the opponent thinks them reaching over is a hindrance, all these other little things that pop up, okay? Because you're never going to be able to get the ultimate conclusion in a vacuum. The things have to happen in real life, and then the lawyers are always quoted saying this, the facts and circumstances are going to win out. And they're different in every single point, in every single moment, which is why if you're smart, you're never really going to say you can or can do something. It's always like, it depends, right? And that's why people hate lawyers, because good lawyers, the answer is usually, it depends, like, unfortunately, because it does. It depends on the facts and circumstances of that particular point of what's going on there. And then 30 million different things can happen, which is then you're going to have to apply the rules and go, okay, what's the ultimate answer? So I want to end this video with this podcast with two pretty cool videos. One of them is Milos Raonic, I always forget how to pronounce his name, where he's literally reaching over the net. Okay, so I'm going to play it on my end here and watch it and comment on it, and then obviously I'll be able to somehow put it on the video. It's 45 seconds here. Okay, so the start of the video is this guy's serving to Milos. Milos is returning, looks like mixed doubles. The girl at the net frames it. Ball's coming back, spin over. Milos reached over the net, smacked it downwards. Now, later on, it's going to come into play whether or not he, in my mind, it's going to come into play, not the refs or anyone there, whether he hit the ball into the ground or into the net. But when you watch this replay, here it comes. Milos does not touch the net. Reaches over, smacks it. Looks like it hit the ground first, okay? So we don't even have to get to the ultimate answer of whether he hit the net or not. But boom, hit the ground. There you go. To me, that looks like a totally normal play that we've just found out falls directly into the rules or into the okay part of the rules, where the ball bounced on his side, so we're not going into the rule of whether or not you can reach over the net when the ball has not crossed the net, right? That's a different question. We're going into Rule 25 under the good return section where we say, look, is this a good shot? Is this a good return? Is this a valid shot that should be considered a valid shot and gives the opponent the opportunity to get it back? Under Rule 25, remember, I'll read it again. After the ball is in play, has hit the ground within the correct court, and has spun or been blown back over the net, the player reaches over the net and plays the ball into the correct court. That's a good shot according to the rules, and that's exactly what Milos did. After the ball hit his side from that opponent, the girl at the net framing it landed and spun, and it landed in his court, the correct court, and has spun back. Remember, his particular ball spun back. The player, who was Milos in this particular instance, reaches over the net and hits it. That's a valid, good shot. The ref, obviously there, I forget his name, but he's a very experienced ref who's been around a long time. He, I think, rightfully gave Milos the point there. So that's good. Sounds like the ref did their job there. Sounds like sort of an easy question when you read the rules, the easy question to get answered, that you're allowed to do that. Now, whether or not he can hit it in the net or in the ground, that's another day. Okay, so don't drip down my throat on, no, that's such an easy answer. I don't think it is. The last clip I'm going to show you here, hold on, let me cough again, is from my favorite match ever in tennis. Okay, actually, you know what? The Sinner Carlos match last year in the 2022 US Open is right up there for me. That full match was just ridiculous. But nothing beats, in my opinion, the 2017 Australian Open final with Federer and Nadal. They were both lower in the seedings. They were both coming off injury, not playing that much. They're both going for history with, at the time, with some high, getting up there with their major wins. So at least once a week, and I think I've said this on their podcast, I watch the fifth set where Federer's down 3-1. Nadal's up 3-1 in the fifth set. Federer ends up winning 6-3. And there you can find some parts on YouTube where people start the video on when he's down 3-1 in the fifth set. It's just really cool to watch point by point. But there is this one point in particular. Federer is now up 5-3. Remember, he was down 3-1. He came back. He's up 5-3 and he's serving. He's down love 30. Okay? And I'm going to press play here at the love 30 because the video goes sort of quickly. But the point I'm more concerned about is the 15-30 point. I'm going to press play here. It's love 30. Federer serves. Okay, we'll just watch this point. Looks like an ace. Big Federer. And by the way, I just pressed pause on this video here. Or maybe I shouldn't do that for editing later. But either way, I'll hit play. Federer, I didn't know this, is like top 5 in number of aces ever. Like, I just can't believe that. What a server. Okay, he's down 15-30. Look, serve out wide. Okay. Nadal's sort of taking control of this point. Backhand up the line. Federer, low lob. Boom. Oh my gosh, what was that, right? No one even questioned. I think McEnroe was commentating, was like, yeah, great shot, or whatever he said. But look at this replay. Look at this replay. Why is no one asking the question there of whether or not he reached over the net? Okay, I'm pausing that video now. I'm going back to me. If you look at that replay of the side view, right, we have now answered the question that no one in the stands could answer it. No one in the stands is allowed to say anything. You as Federer can't ask your wife or your team if Nadal's crossed the net. It's not allowed, right? We don't even have to get into the question of whether or not the ball bounces on your side and then what can you do, because the ball didn't bounce. Nadal hit it in the air. So now the rule that applies is that rule we spoke of earlier, where if the ball hasn't crossed the net, and remember, the rule is the player must concede the point when that player hits a ball before it crosses the net. The real question to be answered there is, did Nadal hit the ball on Federer's side of the net or on Nadal's side of the net? Because ultimately Nadal is allowed, I've looked this up in the rules too, is allowed to have his follow-through finish over the net as long as his contact and shot were on his side of the net. So let's just keep this simple and try to picture it. Federer hits a high looper, Nadal's on his side. Nadal hits it. Here's the net, but his follow-through follows through over the net. It's pretty obvious, according to the rules that I read, that that's Nadal's point. He did nothing wrong, I guess is a better way to say it. Now let's flip it a little and exaggerate it the other way. Federer hits a real slow shot. Nadal literally sticks his racket over the net and is waiting there and then hits it. According to the rule we read, that's an obvious problem. Nadal should lose that point. The player must concede the point. Now, the question for the referee, the only question at that moment, should have been whether or not Nadal hit the ball before it crossed the net. And I just found it really weird that no one even questioned it in that moment. Like, I think if Federer would have made a stink there, he would have had a good chance maybe to win that point. I don't know. There's no replays. I mean, I guess not, right? The ref would have ruled in Nadal's favor, it sounds like, since the ref didn't see a problem with it. But I just find it weird now, looking back at that point, after researching these rules, that if the ref thought Nadal reached over the net, in my opinion, it looked like it, and before it crossed the net, Nadal should have lost that point. It should have been 30-all. Ultimately, we know that Federer wins that game and wins the set and wins the match and wins that trophy, right? The Australian Open major. But I always wonder, because Federer went down 15-40 in that game because he lost that point. Imagine if he would have lost that game. I can't even imagine if, things, how they would have been different. But he ultimately wins the game, so who cares? But I just find it a little funny. that occurred. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this. This went a lot longer than I wanted. From now on, I'll try to keep it a little simpler, but I'm going to start going into the rules a little. And if you disagree with this, please tell me in the comments, and start subscribing to this stuff, because I'm going to try to put this out at a weekly basis once I research some rules that I'm interested in. And start telling me what you think. Am I wrong? Did I get it spot on? Did you have situations yourself where you've been into this, kind of problems? Because I think we all have if you've played long enough. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so much.